Chapter 1: The light on the executive floor. Friday nights had a personality of their own. By 6 in the evening most of the building had emptied. By 8 it felt abandoned. By 10 it belonged to maintenance crews, security guards, and the strange breed of people who genuinely enjoyed solving problems long after everyone else had gone home. John Thane had always fit comfortably into that category. At 42 he had spent more than half his life inside the company. He started in the trenches pulling cable, replacing failed hardware, and performing the thankless tasks nobody noticed unless something went wrong. Now he was division chief. The title sounded impressive. The reality mostly involved making sure talented people had everything they needed to do their jobs and then staying out of their way. As he finished his last round through the executive floor, his usual lopsided grin sat unnoticed on his face. A technician named Carlos was finishing repairs on a secretary's workstation. "How bad was it?" John asked. Carlos rolled his eyes. "User error. The international language." They clicked 3 warning messages. "Only 3? That's practically restraint." Carlos laughed. "Everything else looks good. I'll send the report." "No rush. Get home." "You too, Chief." John's grin widened. "I'll consider it." As Carlos packed his tools, John headed toward the elevator. That was when he noticed a light. The CEO's office sat at the far end of the executive corridor. Every other office was dark. Only hers remained illuminated. John stopped. Somebody forgot a switch. It wasn't exactly his job to police electricity usage, but small habits became automatic after enough years. He turned and walked toward the office. The walls beside him reflected city lights through enormous windows. Beyond the glass, the skyline glittered beneath the dark sky. As he approached, he glanced through the open doorway. Then he stopped. Linda Denver sat behind her desk. Not working, not reading, not typing. She sat sideways in her chair, facing the windows, watching the city. The reflection in the glass showed her face before he could see it directly. And something about that reflection hit him unexpectedly. Loneliness, not sadness. Not frustration, loneliness, the kind that didn't belong to one difficult day, the kind that had been carried around for years. John stood there for a moment longer than he should have. He barely knew the woman. Their interaction typically consisted of brief discussions during leadership meetings. She was smart, prepared, professional. That was the extent of his knowledge. Yet seeing her sitting alone in a giant office overlooking an entire city somehow felt wrong. Before he could think better of it, he lightly knocked on the door frame. Linda jumped. Her head turned immediately. For a split second she looked startled. Then recognition arrived. "Oh," she laughed softly. "John, you scared me." He raised both hands. "Sorry. I thought the lights got left on." "I wish it was that simple." The answer came with a smile, but it sounded tired. He stepped closer. "I didn't know anyone else was still here." Apparently neither did I. For a moment neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just unexpected. Then John's mouth made a decision without consulting him. "Ms. Denver, Linda." He blinked. "What?" "After 10 o'clock on a Friday, I think we've earned first names." A chuckle escaped him. "Fair enough." "Linda." She leaned back slightly. "What did you need?" The obvious answer was nothing. He should probably wish her a good evening and head home. Instead he heard himself say, "I was on my way to get something to eat." Linda looked curious. "So was I. You just happened to be doing it while staring at an entire city?" No judgment. Only mild concern. That earned an honest laugh. For some reason, that encouraged him. "If you're not still stuck here," he said, "I'd love some company." Silence. Not rejection. Surprise. Real surprise. Linda stared at him for several seconds. The invitation was so unexpected that her defenses didn't seem to know how to react. John wasn't flirting. He wasn't making a move. He wasn't trying to impress her. He simply looked interested in having dinner with another human being. Nothing more. Nothing less. Something softened in her expression. "Aren't you worried about appearances? At 10 o'clock on a Friday?" She smiled. "That's a good point. I know a place that's still open." Her smile grew wider. "I would like that." The words came out quietly, but they carried far more sincerity than John expected. "Great." He nodded toward the hallway. "I'll wait while you lock up." 5 minutes later they entered the elevator together. The doors closed. For the first time in years, Linda Denver was leaving work because someone had invited her somewhere. The realization felt strangely significant. "So," John said as the elevator descended, "what crime kept the CEO in the office this late?" She sighed dramatically. "Paperwork. Brutal. Your sympathy means a lot. I once had to review inventory records." "You survived." "Barely." Linda laughed again. It surprised both of them how easy the conversation felt. By the time they reached the lobby, neither was thinking about work anymore. Outside, cool evening air greeted them. John pointed across town. "Restaurants about 15 minutes from here. You giving me a ride?" His grin appeared. "No." She blinked. "No. No pressure. No obligations. You know where it is now." Understanding slowly dawned. He was giving her an easy exit. A choice, not an expectation. John unlocked his car door. I hope I see you there. Linda studied him for a second. Then something warm settled in her chest. You're unusual, John. So I've been told. He climbed into his car. Have a safe drive, Linda. You too. A moment later he pulled away. Linda remained standing on the curb. Confused, amused, curious. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings. She wasn't thinking about reports, budgets, forecasts, or corporate strategy. She was wondering whether a quiet man from the company's basement was already sitting in a restaurant waiting to see if she'd show up. And to her own surprise, she found herself smiling as she walked toward her car. The city lights seemed a little less lonely than they had an hour earlier. Chapter 2, An Unexpected Tradition. The restaurant was nothing special. That was precisely why John liked it. It sat on a side street between a bookstore and an old tailor shop that somehow remained in business despite looking unchanged since the early 1980s. The food was good, the prices were reasonable, and nobody bothered anyone. John arrived first. That wasn't surprising. John arrived early for everything. At 6 in the morning, he was usually the first manager in the building. At meetings, he arrived before the organizers. More than once, he had arrived at a restaurant before it officially opened. He settled into a booth near the window and ordered coffee. Then he glanced outside. No expectations, no assumptions. If Linda decided to go home, he'd understand. A few minutes later, a black sedan pulled into a parking space across the street. John looked up. A surprisingly unfamiliar feeling crossed his mind. Hope. Linda stepped out of her car. He smiled. She saw him through the window and smiled back. Some of the tension she had carried all evening disappeared before she even reached the door. When she sat down across from him, she exhaled deeply. That might be the first time in 20 years I've left work because someone invited me somewhere. John nodded. Then I guess we're both trying something new. What's your new thing? Eating dinner with the CEO. That made her laugh. The waitress appeared. Menus were distributed. Drinks were ordered. For a few moments, the conversation remained comfortably ordinary. It wasn't until the food arrived that Linda looked across the table and asked the question she had been wondering ever since leaving the office. Why did you invite me? John considered the question. Because it deserved an honest answer. I don't know. She blinked. You don't know? I know why I walked to your office. You thought the light was left on, right? And after that? John took a drink of coffee, then shrugged. You looked lonely. Linda stared at him. The simple honesty caught her completely off guard. Most executives spent entire careers learning how to avoid saying things like that. John simply said them. Not cruelly. Not dramatically. Matter-of-factly. The way he might mention it looked like rain. She looked down at her plate. Was it that obvious? Only because I recognized it. That got her attention. You get lonely? Everybody gets lonely. Not from what I've heard. He raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Your people practically worship you. John nearly choked on his drink. They absolutely do not. They absolutely do. I promise they don't. John. Linda. The straight-faced response made her laugh. Again, she was beginning to notice a pattern. The man was funny. Not intentionally funny. Not performatively funny. Just naturally. The kind of humor that appeared when someone was comfortable enough not to impress anybody. Something she encountered far less often than she'd like. So, she asked, what's your secret? My secret. Your department. He frowned. What about it? Nobody's afraid of you. Why would they be? You're the division chief. So? She looked genuinely puzzled. John seemed equally puzzled by her confusion. Finally, he leaned back. Linda, I hired experts. And they're experts. She waited. Apparently that was the entire explanation. So you trust them? I'd be stupid not to. Most managers aren't that comfortable. John smiled slightly. Most managers want obedience. What do you want? Results. The answer came immediately. No technician has ever fixed a server because I gave an inspiring speech. Linda laughed into her drink. That's probably true. They solve problems because they're good at their jobs. My responsibility is making sure they have what they need and getting out of their way. For several moments she didn't speak. The simplicity of the philosophy appealed to her. So that's really how you think? About what? Leadership. John shrugged. It's how I'd want somebody treating me. A strange expression crossed Linda's face. One John couldn't quite identify. Perhaps because she couldn't identify it herself. Admiration wasn't a feeling she usually experienced toward people inside the company. Respect, certainly. Confidence. Trust. But admiration? That was different. The evening passed surprisingly quickly. Conversation shifted from work to books. Books became movies. Movies became terrible movies. Terrible movies became stories about regrettable life decisions. By midnight, both of them were laughing far more than either had expected. As they stood in the parking lot afterward, Linda looked up at him. This was nice. John nodded. It was. She waited. somehow expecting something else. An invitation, a suggestion, plan. Instead, he simply smiled. Drive safe. And that was it. Linda sat in her car afterward feeling strangely disappointed. Not because she wanted more, because she wasn't sure why she wanted more. The following Friday arrived with remarkable speed. John wasn't thinking about dinner. At least that's what he told himself. He spent the day reviewing maintenance schedules, meeting with technicians, approving upgrades, and solving problems. By 10 that evening, he found himself stepping onto the executive floor. The CEO's office light was on again. He stopped, stared, then sighed. Well, a familiar laugh reached him. Linda was standing in her doorway. Checking on my electricity usage? Somebody has to. You're becoming a problem. I've been informed of that before. She smiled. So where are we eating tonight? John blinked, then laughed. And just like that, a tradition was born. 3 weeks later, people started noticing. Not because John and Linda behaved differently. Quite the opposite. Neither changed at all. The executive assistants merely began observing that the CEO left the building before midnight on Fridays. Every Friday. Meanwhile, the technicians noticed their division chief occasionally left before 10:30. Also every Friday. Curiosity spread. Speculation followed. Lunchtime discussions became increasingly creative. Carlos sat in the dungeon break room with 3 other technicians. Maybe she's recruiting him. For what? I don't know. That's a terrible theory. What if they're secretly relatives? The entire table stared at him. How would that work? I don't know. Then stop helping. Across the room, another technician snorted into her coffee. Meanwhile, neither John nor Linda had any idea these conversations existed. They were too busy discussing whether penguins would make terrible security guards. They can't run fast enough, Linda argued. They don't need to. They absolutely do. They travel in groups. That's your argument? It's a strong argument. It isn't. It absolutely is. You've never thought about this before. John grinned. That's a hurtful accusation. The old waiter walking past their table finally interrupted. I've listened to this conversation for 10 minutes. Linda smiled. And he has a point. She stared. The waiter nodded seriously. Nobody messes with a group of penguins. Then he walked away. Linda looked at John. John looked at Linda. Both burst into helpless laughter. It took nearly a minute for either to recover. By then tears had formed at the corners of Linda's eyes. I can't believe that happened. He seemed knowledgeable. He seemed 80. Experience counts. Oh, stop. For a long moment neither spoke. Not because the conversation ran out. Because the silence had become comfortable. An easy thing. A natural thing. Neither entirely noticed when it happened. But somewhere between the first dinner and the fourth, they had stopped being 2 executives sharing a meal. They had become friends. Real friends. The kind formed unexpectedly. The kind neither person realized they needed until they existed. As the evening ended and they stepped outside, Linda looked up at the city skyline. The sight was exactly the same as the night John found her alone in her office. Nothing had changed. And yet everything felt different. She wasn't dreading the weekend anymore. She wasn't thinking about returning to an empty apartment. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to next Friday. When she glanced over, John was smiling at something only he could see. That small crooked grin appeared again. The one he never seemed aware of. For reasons she couldn't yet explain, seeing it made her smile too. Chapter 3 Rumors, Assumptions, and Other Natural Disasters. John Thane discovered something important on the 5th Friday. People noticed patterns. The realization arrived courtesy of Carlos. The technician appeared in John's office shortly after lunch carrying a maintenance report. He set the paperwork down, then stood there, waiting. John glanced up. Something broken? No. Need approval? No. Then why are you still standing there? Carlos crossed his arms. How's the CEO? John blinked. What? The CEO. What about her? Carlos grinned. John immediately became suspicious. What do you know? Nothing. That's never a good answer. It's actually the worst answer. John leaned back in his chair. Carlos was many things. Subtle wasn't one of them. Finally John sighed. Get to the point. Carlos smiled triumphantly. People think you're dating. Silence. Then John laughed. Actually laughed. So hard he had to remove his glasses. Carlos looked disappointed. That's not the reaction I expected. What reaction did you expect? Denial. I'm not dating her. See? That's denial. John shook his head. You people need hobbies. Carlos pointed dramatically. That's exactly what somebody secretly dating the CEO would say. Leave. Understood. Carlos turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth. John groaned. What now? You smile more on Fridays. The door closed before John could throw something at him. For several moments he sat in silence, then shook his head. People were ridiculous. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Linda was having a similar conversation. Except hers involved executives, which somehow made it worse. The weekly leadership meeting had officially ended 15 minutes earlier. Most attendees had left. A few remained behind collecting notes. Linda was organizing paperwork when her chief financial officer sat down again. He wore the expression of a man about to make poor life choices. Linda immediately recognized it. What? Nothing. David. Nothing important. She sighed. It was never nothing. Finally, he cleared his throat. So? No. I haven't asked yet. You were going to. Probably. Linda looked exhausted already. What is it? Are you dating John? The room became silent. 3 remaining executives immediately became fascinated by their laptops. Nobody looked up. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. David raised both hands. To be fair, everyone is wondering. Linda stared at him, then at the others, then back at him. No. He looked surprised. Really? Yes. Oh. Pause followed. Then Linda narrowed her eyes. Why does everyone assume that? David looked genuinely confused. Because you leave work. I always leave work. No. He shook his head. Physically, yes. The rest of the room suddenly became very interested in this conversation. Linda noticed, and was not pleased. David continued before anyone could stop him. You've been happier. Silence. That answer she wasn't expecting. The amusement drained away. Happier? Much. One of the vice presidents finally spoke. We were actually worried about you. Linda looked startled. Worried? The woman nodded. You work all the time. We all work all the time. Not like you do. Nobody laughed. Nobody disagreed. For the first time, Linda realized they were serious. David leaned forward. Whatever it is, you're different. Linda looked down at her notes. Different. The word lingered. Eventually she stood. The answer is still no. David nodded. Fair enough. She headed toward her office. Halfway to the door, she heard him call after her. You should date him, though. Laughter erupted. Linda didn't turn around, but she did smile. That Friday evening they met at their usual restaurant. The waiter greeted them immediately. Your table is ready. Linda pointed. We have a table now? You've been here every week for over a month. John nodded thoughtfully. We've become predictable. The waiter sighed. Painfully. After he left, Linda looked across the table. I have a question. That's never dangerous. It is this time. John frowned suspiciously. Should I be worried? Probably. Wonderful. She fought a smile. Apparently people think we're dating. John stared, then laughed. Immediately. Completely. Hopelessly. Linda found herself laughing too. Mostly because that had been her exact reaction. When they finally settled down, John shook his head. People are ridiculous. That's what I said. See? We're already agreeing like an old married couple. The second the words escaped his mouth, both froze. A moment later, John pointed at himself. That one was my fault. It definitely was. I regret everything. Linda smiled into her water glass. The conversation moved on. But not completely. The topic lingered nearby. Eventually she asked, when was your last relationship? John answered without hesitation. Long time ago. How long? Depends on your definition. Use the scary definition. He laughed softly. Probably 15 years. Linda nearly dropped her fork. 15 years. Give or take. John. What? That's not normal. It was peaceful. It's not supposed to be peaceful. He pointed at her. Says the woman who's never been married. Linda leaned back. Fair. John smiled. I dated a little in my 30s. Little? Very little. What happened? For a moment he considered the question. The answer wasn't painful anymore. Hadn't been for years. Nothing dramatic. What does that mean? He took a sip of coffee. My engagement ended when I was 27. Linda nodded quietly. He rarely talked about himself. She knew that much already. We wanted different lives, he continued. Nobody did anything wrong. Nobody betrayed anybody. We just wanted different futures. That must have hurt. It did. How long? John thought about it. Not as long as most people expect. Why? Because we were both honest. Linda considered that. There was wisdom in it. A simple kind. The sort earned through experience rather than philosophy. So what happened after that? John smiled slightly. Life. That's annoyingly vague. I focused on work. You dated. Occasionally. And, he shrugged. Most of them weren't interested in me. Linda frowned. That sounded absurd. Not because he was extraordinarily handsome, though he wasn't bad-looking. It was because he possessed something increasingly rare. Peace. The man was comfortable with himself. She was beginning to suspect how uncommon that actually was. John continued. Then suddenly a lot of women became interested. Why is that a problem? His smile turned amused. Because they weren't interested in me. The answer landed instantly. Linda understood immediately. Oh, yeah. She looked down, feeling unexpectedly sad. Participation trophy. John pointed at her. Exactly. The phrase made her laugh despite herself. I knew what they wanted. Stability. Security. A future. John nodded. All reasonable things. But I wanted somebody who actually liked me. Linda stared at him. The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more powerful. No bitterness. No anger. Just honesty. I can understand that. His eyes met hers. Neither spoke for a second. Then John smiled. What about you? Linda groaned. No. Oh yes. I asked first. That's not how conversations work. It should be. John waited. Patiently. Eventually she surrendered. I kept thinking I'd make time later. For relationships? For everything. She laughed at herself. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. John didn't laugh. Because it didn't sound ridiculous. Just familiar. My 20s were busy. She counted on her fingers. Then my 30s were busier. Then the company expanded. Then promotions happened. And suddenly you're 41. Exactly. The answer came quietly. John nodded. No judgment. No pity. Just understanding. Somehow that was worse. Or better. She wasn't sure. As dinner continued, the conversation grew lighter again. Movies, books, travel stories, terrible cooking experiences. By the end of the evening both were laughing once more. Outside the restaurant, a cool breeze drifted through the streets. The city felt alive around them. For a moment neither moved toward their cars. Not awkward. Just reluctant. Finally Linda looked at him. You know they're going to keep talking. Who? Everybody. John nodded. Probably. Does it bother you? He thought about it. Then shook his head. No. Why not? His crooked grin appeared. Because he'd forgotten it was there. People can think whatever they want. Linda smiled. And if they think we're dating? John shrugged. They'll eventually get bored. She laughed. That's your plan. It's worked so far. A comfortable silence followed. Then Linda shook her head. You're impossible. So I've heard. She looked at him for a long moment. And for the first time, a thought entered her mind that felt surprisingly dangerous. What if everyone was wrong? But not completely wrong. The thought stayed with her all the way home. And unfortunately, it was still there when she woke up the next morning. Chapter 4 The world's worst non-date. The trouble began on a Tuesday. That alone should have been suspicious. Nothing interesting ever happened on Tuesdays. John was reviewing maintenance reports when his office phone rang. Almost nobody called him anymore. Most people simply walked into his office. He picked up. John. You're working. He immediately recognized Linda's voice. I sincerely hope so. Good. Pause followed. Not an uncomfortable one. Merely unusual. Finally Linda spoke. I have a favor to ask. John looked at the receiver. That sentence concerns me. It shouldn't. It always should. Her laugh drifted through the line. I need you to do something this Saturday. John frowned. Work-related. No. His concern increased. Why? Because apparently I need hobbies. The answer caught him completely off guard. What? The executive team held an intervention. You make that sound dramatic. It was dramatic. You weren't there. You just described it as an intervention. I didn't need to be. Linda sighed. The short version is that everyone agrees I work too much. John leaned back. They're probably right. I knew you'd take their side. I'm not taking sides. You absolutely are. I'm merely standing near the facts. A moment passed. Then she asked the question. Would you spend Saturday doing something that isn't work? John stared at the phone. With you. That's generally how invitations work. A grin began appearing. You realize people are already talking. People talk when the weather changes. Fair point. So, what exactly are we doing? I have no idea. John laughed. That actually sounded exactly like something Linda would say. You're inviting me to an event you haven't planned. I'm branching out. It's terrifying. John. Yes, Saturday. He smiled. All right. Really? Sure. A brief silence followed. For some reason she sounded pleased. More pleased than she probably intended. Good. Then she hung up. John sat there for several seconds. Then shook his head. Somehow he'd just agreed to spend an entire Saturday away from work. His technicians would never believe it. Saturday arrived with beautiful weather. The universe immediately punished them for attempting happiness. John discovered this when he found Linda standing beside her car. Looking annoyed, he parked and walked over. Problem? She pointed. The rear tire sat completely flat. John nodded. That appears to be less air than intended. Linda crossed her arms. I noticed. This is already going well. We've been together for 3 minutes. Exactly. She laughed despite herself. Fortunately, John knew how to change a tire. Unfortunately, the spare tire appeared to have developed retirement plans years earlier. So, Linda asked, is that bad? John stared at the spare. It depends. On what? Whether we're measuring success realistically. An hour later, roadside assistance had solved the problem. Their carefully planned departure time was gone. Neither cared very much. They hadn't actually had a plan. The next disaster arrived 30 minutes later. The restaurant where Linda had made reservations no longer existed. Not permanently, just for the afternoon. A burst water pipe had forced the building to close. The handwritten sign on the front door felt especially personal. That seems unlikely, Linda said. What part? All of it. John nodded. The day may be cursed. Do we need an exorcist? Maybe. You're taking this remarkably well. John looked around. What exactly would panic improve? She hated how much sense that made. I'm starting to see why you're technicians like you. They don't. They absolutely do. The argument had become so familiar by now that both smiled automatically. After abandoning the restaurant idea, they decided to simply walk through downtown. At first it sounded reasonable. Then they discovered half the city apparently had the same idea. A street festival occupied multiple blocks. Music filled the air. Food vendors lined the sidewalks. Crowds swarmed everywhere. Linda looked around in amazement. I didn't know this was happening. Neither did I. Should we leave? John considered it, then shook his head. We're here. That's your standard? Pretty much. She laughed. Your decision-making process remains disturbing, yet effective. Debatable. For the next 2 hours they wandered through the festival. Neither had done anything similar in years. They sampled food from vendors, argued about music, watched a street magician accidentally reveal his own trick, and somehow enjoyed every minute. The freedom felt strange, almost rebellious. No meetings, no reports, no emergencies, no responsibilities, just a pleasant afternoon. The realization hit Linda unexpectedly. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been this relaxed. Not because the day was perfect. Clearly wasn't. Because she wasn't trying to control it. Then the charity incident happened. Years later, both would blame the other. Neither claim would be accurate. A volunteer approached carrying a clipboard. Excuse me. John made the mistake of making eye contact. The volunteer smiled. We're raising money for the children's hospital. That immediately eliminated escape. 10 seconds later, they were listening politely. 30 seconds later, they had donated. 1 minute later, they were somehow entered into a contest. Linda blinked. What just happened? I have no idea. The volunteer pointed toward a small stage. The couple's challenge starts in 5 minutes. Silence. The volunteer left. Neither moved. Finally, Linda turned. The what challenge? John looked equally alarmed. I believe he said couples challenge. He definitely said couples challenge. That's unfortunate. A realization struck simultaneously. Both began laughing. Hard. The kind of helpless laughter that arrives when something becomes too ridiculous to process normally. Eventually Linda managed to breathe. We should probably tell them. Probably. Neither moved. 5 minutes later they stood backstage wearing numbered stickers. John. Yes. What are we doing? I honestly don't know. The contest turned out to be harmless. Embarrassing. But harmless. Teams answered questions and completed simple activities. Nothing particularly difficult. Unfortunately, one question asked how long they had been together. The audience enjoyed their answer significantly more than intended. Approximately 2 months of weekly dinners, John replied. The crowd erupted. Linda buried her face in her hands. John grinned unapologetically. By the time the contest ended, neither had won. But both had laughed so much their faces hurt. As they left the stage, Linda looked at him. This is officially the strangest day I've had in years. Good strange or bad strange? She thought about it, then smiled. Good strange. Something warm settled between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something deeper. Ease. The rare comfort of enjoying someone's company without effort. Evening arrived. The festival lights began glowing as the sun disappeared. Neither seemed eager to leave. Eventually they found themselves sitting on a bench overlooking the river. The city shimmered around them. For several minutes they simply watched the water. Comfortable silence again. A recurring theme. Finally Linda spoke. You know what's weird? Lots of things. Helpful. I do my best. She rolled her eyes, then looked toward the river. I spent years thinking success would eventually make life feel complete. John listened quietly. And it turns out success is just success. He nodded, not dismissing her words, understanding them. You built something impressive. I know. But, Linda smiled sadly. But the office is still empty when I go home. Neither spoke for a moment. Then John gave her the same honesty she'd come to expect. For what it's worth. She looked over. I think you're figuring out there's supposed to be more than one chapter in life. The statement hung between them. Simple. True. Perhaps a little uncomfortable. Linda studied him for a moment. You always have answers? No. Could have fooled me. I just spent half a day trapped in a festival and accidentally entered a couples competition. Fair. The city lights reflected in the river. The breeze carried music from distant streets. For the first time in a long while, Linda wasn't thinking about work waiting on Monday. She wasn't thinking about reports or deadlines. She was thinking about today. The laughter. the conversations, the ease, and the quiet man sitting beside her. A dangerous thought appeared. Not terrifying, just unsettling. She was beginning to look forward to seeing him for reasons that had nothing to do with friendship. The realization was new enough that she immediately ignored it. Unfortunately for her, it refused to go away. Chapter 5, Fairy Tales and Reality. The following Friday felt different. Neither of them mentioned it. Both noticed it. The easy rhythm of weekly dinners remained unchanged, but there was a new awareness beneath the surface. Nothing dramatic, nothing uncomfortable, just noticeable. John arrived first as usual. Linda arrived 3 minutes later. As she slid into the booth, he glanced at her. "You look tired." "Rude." "It's an observation." "It's a rude observation." John smiled. "Long week." She sighed. "Board meetings." "I'm sorry." "See? That's the correct response." The waiter appeared. Orders were placed. The familiar routine settled around them. Comfortable, reliable, something neither had expected when all of this started. After the waiter left, Linda studied him. "You know what's strange? Dangerous opening. Talking to you. I generally recommend it." She rolled her eyes. "Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to look impressive. You work with executives." "Exactly." John nodded. "Occupational hazard. But you don't do that." He looked confused. "Do what?" "Try to impress anyone." "Sounds exhausting." Linda laughed, then became thoughtful. "I don't think you've ever actually told me about your engagement." John took a sip of coffee. There it was, the topic they'd circled around several times. "I told you the short version. I want the longer version." "I don't know if there's a longer version." "There always is." John considered that. Maybe she was right. After a moment he nodded. "Her name was Rebecca." Linda listened quietly. "We met in our 20s. Dated for several years." "Were you in love?" The question was direct, but that had become normal between them. "Yeah." The answer came easily, without hesitation, without pain. "We were good people." Linda noticed his choice of words. Not perfect, not soulmates, good people, past tense, matter of fact. "No villains, no villains, no betrayal?" "Nope." He smiled slightly. "We simply wanted different futures." "What kind of different?" John leaned back. "Rebecca loved big dreams. Meaning, storybook dreams." Linda nodded, understanding immediately. He continued. "Nothing wrong with that. Everybody should want whatever life makes them happy." But reality kept showing up. A soft laugh escaped her. "I know that feeling. We'd make plans. Then life would happen. Bills, work, responsibilities." He paused. "Eventually we realized we were trying to fit each other into lives that didn't exist." Linda remained silent, giving him space. No screaming matches. No dramatic endings. One day we had a conversation. A hard conversation. Very. His eyes drifted briefly toward the restaurant window. "We loved each other enough not to force the other person to become someone else." For several moments Linda didn't respond. The honesty of it struck her. Most failed relationships were explained through blame. John spoke about acceptance. "So you ended it?" "Yeah." "Were you angry?" "No." "Sad?" "Of course." His smile was small. "But sadness eventually heals." Linda looked down. "What happened to her?" "I honestly don't know." The answer surprised her. "You never checked?" He shook his head. "She deserved to build her life. And you built yours." Something like that. A silence settled between them. Not empty, thoughtful. Linda found herself admiring him again. Not because his story was tragic. Because it wasn't. He'd survived disappointment without turning bitter. An increasingly rare accomplishment. Finally she looked up. "I don't think I've ever had what you had." "What?" "That. Heartbreak." "No." She smiled faintly. "The relationship before the heartbreak." That earned a laugh. "Fair. It's true." The humor faded. "I always had a goal." John listened. "Graduate." She counted on her fingers. "Find a position worth having." Another finger. "Get promoted." Another. "Expand responsibility." Another. "Become executive leadership." Another. "Become CEO." She looked at her hand, then laughed softly. "I was apparently collecting achievements like a game character." John smiled. "Did it make you happy?" The question arrived gently, without judgment. Linda thought about it, carefully, because she didn't want to lie. Sometimes. A simple answer. An honest one. Not always. John nodded. The goals mattered. They did. The accomplishments mattered. They still do. But. Linda stared at her untouched drink, then exhaled. "But eventually I ran out of mountains." He didn't speak. She appreciated that. Most people rush to fill silence. John allowed it to exist. "When I became CEO, everybody congratulated me." She smiled. "I deserved it." "You absolutely did." "I know." The answer made him laugh. She continued. "I remember going home that night." Her voice softened. "I expected something." "What?" I don't know. The confession surprised even her. A feeling. Some kind of completion. She shook her head. Instead, I ordered takeout and watched television. John smiled. Not exactly a movie ending. Not even a little. Their eyes met. The understanding between them no longer needed explanation. Both had spent years building successful lives. Both had discovered success solved fewer problems than advertised. Neither regretted their choices, but neither pretended those choices came without costs. The waiter returned. Refills appeared. Conversation shifted. Lighter subjects. Vacation disasters. Terrible first apartments. College mistakes. The hours slipped by. Near the end of dinner, Linda smiled mischievously. I have a question. John groaned. That's becoming a pattern. Answer honestly. No promises. She pointed a finger. Honestly. Fine. Her expression turned suspiciously innocent. When was the last time you went on an actual date? John immediately recognized danger. I object. Overruled. I have rights. You do not. He sighed dramatically, then actually thought, which was unfortunate, because the answer was embarrassing. Oh no, Linda said. You had to calculate. Give me a moment. She laughed. John. I'm working. That's not work. It involves numbers. How long? He winced. Linda stared. Then stared harder. Oh my God. It sounds worse than it is. How long? A while. John. A few years. John. He sighed. 7. There was a brief moment of silence. Then Linda laughed so hard nearby diners looked over. 7 years. I told you it sounded bad. You forgot how dating works. Probably. 7 years. He pointed at her. What about you? Her laughter stopped instantly. A completely different topic. No. It is. Answer the question. She looked away. John stared, then slowly smiled. No. She groaned. He had figured it out. Oh. Exactly. For a moment neither spoke. Then both started laughing. Not at each other. At themselves. At how absurdly similar they really were. Two successful adults. Two competent leaders. Two people capable of managing enormous responsibilities. And apparently two complete disasters at maintaining a personal life. When the laughter finally faded, neither noticed how late it had become, or how long they lingered afterward in the parking lot, or how reluctant they seemed to leave. What both noticed was each other. And for the first time, that realization refused to hide behind friendship. Neither acknowledged it. Not aloud. Not yet. But the possibility now existed. And once seen, it could not be unseen. Chapter 6, The Distance Between Floors. Recognition arrived quietly. Neither John nor Linda could identify the exact moment. There was no lightning strike. No dramatic revelation. No sudden rush of romantic music from nowhere. Life wasn't a movie. Which was unfortunate because movies usually provided warnings when things were about to become complicated. Real life did not. Real life simply allowed two people to wake up one morning and realize someone else had become important. John noticed it first on a Wednesday. Not emotionally. Practically. A problem had developed during a routine server upgrade. Nothing serious. Just irritating. The sort of issue that demanded attention and rewarded patience. Normally he enjoyed solving puzzles like that. Instead he found himself checking the clock. At first he didn't understand why. Then he realized he was wondering whether Linda's board presentation had gone well. John frowned at the monitor. That seemed unnecessary. She was the CEO. Of course it had gone well. A few minutes later he checked the clock again. That's when he became annoyed with himself. Well, that's not ideal. Across the room Carlos looked up. What isn't? John pointed at a server rack. That. Carlos looked at the perfectly functional equipment. Then looked back. Okay. John immediately recognized the expression. It was the same expression technicians used when management started acting strange. Never mind. Gladly. Meanwhile, 3 floors above, Linda was having her own problem. Her board presentation had gone exceptionally well. Every projection had been approved. Every recommendation accepted. Every target exceeded. It should have been a satisfying day. Instead she found herself wanting to tell someone about it. Specifically one person. The realization stopped her cold. She sat back in her office chair. The room was empty, quiet, professional. The same office she'd occupied for years. For some reason it felt different now. Or perhaps she was different. Her hand drifted toward the phone. Then stopped. Calling John simply to share good news felt oddly significant. She couldn't explain why, which probably meant she shouldn't do it. 5 minutes later she called him anyway. The phone was answered on the second ring. John. Good afternoon. He immediately smiled at the sound of her voice. Not that she could see it. Everything all right? Fine. A pause. Then, I survived the board meeting. Congratulations. Thank you. Another pause. Finally John asked the obvious question. Is that why you called? Linda leaned back. Caught. Completely. Maybe. His laugh carried through the phone. I see. If it helps, I had a purpose. I'm listening. I wanted someone to appreciate how painful those meetings are. Now that's a worthy cause. By the end of the call, neither had discussed anything important, and somehow both felt better afterward. That should have been a warning. Unfortunately, life continued providing evidence. Friday arrived. Normally, they would have dinner. Instead, both spent most of the day trying not to think about dinner. An entirely unsuccessful strategy. Linda noticed she had changed outfits twice. That annoyed her. The behavior felt suspiciously close to caring. John caught himself wondering whether a particular restaurant would interest her. That was equally troubling. By 6 o'clock, both were irritated with themselves. By 8 o'clock, neither had improved. By 9:30, they found themselves sitting across from each other at their regular booth. The familiar restaurant suddenly felt much less familiar. The cause was obvious. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The waiter appeared. "You two look serious." "We're thinking." The waiter pointed at John. "That's usually dangerous." Then he walked away. Linda laughed. The tension eased slightly. "Maybe everybody is right." John looked up. "About what?" "Us." He understood immediately. Neither looked away. For the first time since this whole thing began, neither hid behind humor. The silence stretched. Not awkward. Honest. Finally John spoke. "What exactly are they right about?" Linda considered that. Carefully. Because words mattered. Especially now. "I don't know." The admission felt enormous. She continued. "I just know things feel different." John nodded slowly. "Yeah." The answer was quiet, but immediate. No pretending. No confusion. Just truth. For several moments neither spoke. Then John leaned back. "That's inconvenient." Linda laughed. "There it is." "What?" "Your ability to summarize major emotional developments like server maintenance." He smiled. "Occupational hazard." The smile faded. "I like my life." The statement sounded unrelated. It wasn't. Linda understood immediately. "So do I. I enjoy my work." "Me too. I spent years building something I'm proud of." "Same." Their eyes met. The conversation had reached something important. Neither was afraid of relationships. Neither had sworn them off. What frightened them was disruption. Both had carefully built lives they genuinely enjoyed. The prospect of changing those lives carried risk. Real risk. Linda nodded slowly. "I know." The simple understanding in those words eased something inside him. Because she understood what other people often didn't. He wasn't avoiding love because he was damaged. He wasn't alone because he couldn't connect. He simply refused to throw away peace for uncertainty. Linda had reached a similar destination through a different road. Neither needed rescue. Neither needed fixing. That made the situation far more complicated. And perhaps far more meaningful. The following week they both attempted distance. It was a terrible idea. John decided to skip their usual midweek phone conversations. Linda responded by becoming irrationally annoyed. Linda decided not to text him a funny article she'd found. John spent most of the afternoon wondering why she hadn't. Neither admitted what they were doing, which somehow made it worse. By Thursday both were miserable. Not devastated. Not heartbroken. Just annoyed at a missing presence they had grown accustomed to. It was an uncomfortable discovery. Friday finally arrived. By 4 o'clock, Carlos entered John's office. "The server room is fine." John looked up. "Good. The maintenance schedule is fine." "Excellent. The technicians are fine." John narrowed his eyes. "Get to the point." Carlos crossed his arms. "When are you seeing the CEO?" John blinked. "What? You've been grumpy all week." "I have not." Carlos stared. "You're arguing with me right now. Because you're being ridiculous." "That's fair." The technician nodded. "But you're still grumpy." John sighed. Sometimes experience was a curse. Carlos had worked with him for years. The man knew his moods. "Unfortunately, you have work to do." "So that's tonight?" "Leave." Carlos grinned and escaped. John shook his head. Yet despite himself, he found his mood improving. At nearly the exact same time, Linda's executive assistant entered her office. "You're smiling." Linda looked up. "No, I'm not." "You are." "I'm working." "You're also smiling." The assistant paused. "Is John taking you to dinner tonight?" Linda froze. The assistant smiled triumphantly, then wisely retreated before anything could be thrown. Several minutes later Linda found herself laughing. Not because of the question. Because of her reaction. Apparently she had become predictable too. That evening they met outside the restaurant. Neither had arrived first. For reasons neither could explain, that small coincidence made both happy. As they walked toward the entrance together, Linda glanced over. "How was your week?" John looked at her, then smiled. "Long." "Mine too." A few more steps passed. Then Linda spoke again. "Distance was a stupid idea." John laughed immediately. "Absolutely terrible." She smiled. "Good. Good. I'm glad it failed for both of us." For a moment they simply looked at each other. The city lights reflected around them. Traffic moved in the distance. The restaurant door stood a few feet away. Neither reached for it immediately, because for the first time, neither was thinking about dinner. They were thinking about possibilities. And for the first time, those possibilities felt less frightening than walking away from them. Chapter 7, the meeting nobody expected. Monday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a tax audit. John was in the dungeon before sunrise, coffee in hand, reviewing overnight reports with the graveyard shift. Everything looked normal, which should have worried him. Years in technology had taught him a simple rule. Systems did not fail when things looked bad. They failed when everything looked perfect. At 8:17 a.m., his phone rang. At 8:18 a.m., 3 more phones rang. At 8:19 a.m., the first executive assistant appeared looking alarmed. By 8:21 a.m., all available technicians were moving. John listened to 3 different reports simultaneously. One server cluster had stopped responding. A backup routing system had failed to engage correctly. Several departments had suddenly lost access to critical applications. None of these problems should have happened together. The fact that they had was deeply concerning. John stood up. His calm expression never changed. All right. Every technician nearby immediately focused on him. Nobody panic. Carlos snorted. We weren't panicking. Good. We were considering it. John pointed toward a console. Try harder. The room laughed. The tension dropped slightly. Then everyone got to work. 3 floors above, Linda was receiving a very different version of events. The executive version, which mostly consisted of people appearing in her office looking concerned. How bad is it? We don't know. How long will it last? We don't know. What caused it? We don't know. After receiving the same answer from 3 different people, she sighed. Has anyone talked to John? A vice president looked relieved. He's handling it. That answer helped more than it probably should have. Over the past months, Linda had developed enormous confidence in the quiet man living in the lower levels of the building. Not blind confidence, earned confidence. The kind built through competence. If John was involved, the problem would eventually be solved. The only question was how long it would take. The answer turned out to be 3 exhausting days. 3 very long days. John practically lived in the server rooms. Linda practically lived in conference rooms. Multiple teams coordinated around the clock. Technicians worked every shift. Managers removed obstacles. Departments adapted. Everyone pulled together. And through it all, John remained exactly who he always was. Calm, focused, patient. At one point, a frustrated manager stormed into an operations meeting. This is unacceptable. John looked up. The manager continued. We're losing productivity every hour. John nodded. Correct. The manager blinked. Apparently he had expected resistance. Instead he received agreement. We need answers. We're finding them. When? John smiled slightly. The moment we locate them. Several technicians immediately looked down to hide grins. The manager stared, then sighed, then laughed despite himself. You're impossible. So I've heard. The meeting continued. Problem-solving resumed. Forward momentum returned. And eventually the answers emerged. A chain of failures. Rare. Unfortunate. Complicated. But understandable. By the end of the 3rd day, systems were stabilizing. The crisis was ending. Late Wednesday evening, Linda found herself walking toward the dungeon. She rarely visited unless necessary. The lower levels felt like another world. Different atmosphere, different culture, different tempo. As she approached the main operations area, she stopped. John was standing with a group of technicians, listening, not talking, listening. One technician was explaining a solution. Another suggested improvements. John asked a question. Someone else answered. No hierarchy, no ego, just professionals solving problems. Linda watched unnoticed for several moments. A realization settled over her. This was why his people trusted him. Not because he was in charge. Because he respected them. The conversation ended. The technicians dispersed. Only then did John notice her. His tired face immediately brightened. Linda, she smiled. You look terrible. That's the nicest thing anyone has said all day. You're welcome. He laughed. The sound made something warm settle inside her. Neither had seen much of the other during the crisis. More than either had expected, they'd felt the absence. That realization was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. You fixed it. We fixed it. She shook her head. You always do that. Do what? Share credit. John looked genuinely confused. That's because they earned it. Linda smiled. Of course that was his answer. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by softly humming equipment and exhausted professionals. Neither seemed eager to end the conversation. Finally Linda spoke. Want some coffee? John blinked. At 9 o'clock at night? That's your objection? Fair. An hour later they sat alone in a small diner. Neither was dressed for it. Both looked exhausted. Neither cared. Their coffee arrived. For a while they simply sat. The comfortable silence that had grown between them over months returned easily. Then Linda looked at him. I missed you. The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence followed. Not awkward. Honest. Very honest. John stared at his coffee cup. Then at her. I missed you too. Neither looked away. Something shifted. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. Simply unmistakably. The truth had finally entered the room. Linda laughed softly. Well, well. This seems inconvenient. John smiled. You're stealing my lines now. I've had practice. For several moments they simply looked at each other. The world felt strangely quiet. Finally Linda shook her head. I spent years believing work was the most important thing in my life. John listened. No interruptions. No advice. Just attention. She smiled faintly. Then one day I realized I was looking forward to Friday dinners more than successful board meetings. His grin appeared. The crooked one. The one he never noticed. I can see how that would be alarming. It really was. A laugh escaped her. Then faded. Somewhere along the way, you became important to me. The words hung between them. Simple. Direct. Terrifying. John felt something settle inside him. Not panic. Relief. Because he'd been carrying the same realization for weeks. Maybe longer. I know. Linda raised an eyebrow. You know? I became important to me too. She stared. Then groaned. That was terrible. It was. You should be ashamed. Probably. She laughed despite herself. A moment later he became serious. A rare thing. Rare enough that Linda immediately noticed. You're important to me too. No hesitation. No jokes. No qualifiers. Just truth. Neither moved. Neither rushed. There were no grand declarations. No dramatic speeches. Just two people recognizing what had been growing for months. Trust. Respect. Friendship. And now something more. Outside, the city carried on as always. Traffic moved. Lights shined. People hurried past. Inside the diner, however, everything felt unexpectedly still. For the first time in a very long time, both of them were exactly where they wanted to be. And neither had any interest in leaving. Chapter 8. The light that stayed on. Winter arrived gradually. Not with storms. Not with dramatic weather. Just colder mornings, darker evenings, and the quiet realization that another season had passed. Several months passed with it. For the first time in years, neither John nor Linda seemed particularly interested in measuring time by fiscal quarters, project milestones, or company objectives. Not that either neglected their responsibilities. That was never going to happen. If anything, both continued excelling. The difference was what happened after work, or sometimes during lunch, or occasionally on weekends. A peculiar thing happened when two people genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They started finding reasons to spend time together. Neither fought it anymore. Neither analyzed it. They simply enjoyed it. The relationship had grown the same way it had started. Naturally. Without games. Without drama. Without somebody trying to become someone they weren't. For both of them, that was perhaps the greatest surprise. One Friday afternoon, Linda sat in a conference room listening to a presentation. Technically, mentally she was elsewhere. A vice president clicked through another slide. Numbers appeared. Forecasts followed. Everyone nodded seriously. Then the presenter asked a question. Any thoughts? Linda blinked. What? The room laughed. The vice president smiled. You're distracted. I'm listening. No. He pointed toward the window. You're doing the thing. Linda frowned. The thing. The staring and smiling thing. Several people nodded. Her expression became suspicious. What smiling thing? The John thing. The entire room laughed. Linda covered her face. Months ago that would have embarrassed her. Now it merely amused her. The rumors had evolved into accepted reality. Not public announcements. Not corporate gossip. Just a simple fact everyone had gradually figured out. Some people were surprised. Most weren't. The executive assistant who had correctly predicted everything months ago remained unbearably proud of herself. Meanwhile, several floors below, John was receiving similar treatment. Carlos entered the operations center carrying a tablet. Question. No. You don't know it yet. I know you. Carlos looked offended. Fair. He leaned against a nearby desk. Are you seeing Linda tonight? John looked up. Why? I need information. No. Carlos waited. John returned to work. Carlos remained standing there. Eventually John sighed. Yes. Excellent. Why? Carlos nodded toward a technician across the room. We have a $50 bet. The room instantly became silent. Every technician looked away. Poorly. John slowly removed his glasses. You people gamble on my social life? Nobody spoke. Finally one technician raised her hand. In our defense, you didn't used to have one. The room exploded with laughter. Even John couldn't help laughing. You are all terrible. The technician grinned. We learned from professionals. That evening, as always, John completed his rounds. The building gradually emptied. Technicians headed home. Administrative staff departed. Lights switched off throughout the office. A normal Friday. Painfully ordinary Friday. Exactly like the one that had started everything. The realization struck him as he stepped onto the executive floor. For a moment he stopped walking. The hallway looked familiar. The same carpet. The same offices. The same quiet atmosphere. Then he noticed something. A light. The CEO's office. Still illuminated. John smiled immediately. This time he knew the light hadn't been forgotten. He walked toward the door. The office stood open. Linda sat in her chair. Not working. Not reviewing reports. Not staring sadly at the city. Simply waiting. The difference struck him harder than expected. Months ago, loneliness had occupied that room. Now it didn't. Linda turned as he approached. Her smile appeared instantly. There you are. John leaned against the doorway. There you are. You stole my line. I got here first. You absolutely did not. He pointed toward her office. You've been sitting here. I was strategically waiting. A suspicious statement. She laughed. The sound filled the room. Easy. Natural. Happy. John remembered the reflection he had seen in the window months earlier. The loneliness. The distance. The quiet sadness. It seemed impossible now. Not because her life was perfect. Nobody's was. Not because she had stopped working hard. She hadn't. The difference was much simpler than that. She wasn't alone anymore. Neither was he. Ready? He asked. Linda stood. She picked up her coat, purse, keys, nothing else. No stack of reports. No briefcase filled with work. No plans to return in a few hours. Just the essentials. The things actually needed for an evening. Together they left her office. Linda switched off the light. The room went dark behind them. They walked through the executive floor side by side. Toward the elevators. Toward the lobby. Toward whatever came next. Neither needed to rush. Both understood something important. The future didn't need to be perfect. It didn't need fairy tales. It didn't need dramatic promises. It only needed honesty, friendship, trust, the willingness to keep choosing each other. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. They stepped inside. As it descended, Linda glanced over. You know something? What? That first dinner changed my life. John smiled. So did mine. She reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically. Not hesitantly. Like it belonged there. The elevator continued downward. Floor after floor. Toward the lobby. Toward the city. Toward the rest of their lives. And for once, neither of them was in any hurry to get back to work. Epilogue. 1 year later. Some habits never changed. 12 months after a lonely CEO sat staring out at the city and a server chief accidentally invited her to dinner, Friday nights still belonged to them. The same diner. The same booth. The same waiter, who no longer bothered asking whether they wanted their usual drinks. He simply brought them. Life had changed dramatically around those small traditions. The traditions themselves remained. John still arrived first most of the time. Linda still worked too much, though significantly less than before. The executive team remained convinced they deserved credit for the relationship. The technicians remained convinced they deserved credit for the relationship. Both groups were wrong. Though neither John nor Linda had enough energy to argue with them anymore. Tonight felt different. Linda had known it would. For 3 days she had carried a secret. 3 days of nervous excitement. 3 days of staring at test results. 3 days of wondering how a 42-year-old division chief who faced million-dollar system outages without blinking would react. Across from her, John was studying the menu. Not because he needed to. They could practically recite it from memory. It was simply part of the ritual. A familiar comfort. The sight made Linda smile. 1 year later, and seeing him still did that. 5 months ago he had changed her life again. There had been no dramatic speech. No grand performance. Just a Friday night. A quiet dinner. A comfortable silence. Then John had looked across the table and said the words. I love you. Simple. Direct. Completely certain. Because neither of them used words like that casually. Linda hadn't been surprised. The truth was she'd been waiting for it. Not impatiently. Not anxiously. Just knowing it would come when he was ready. She had told him she loved him too. And somehow the world had become brighter afterward. Not different. Better. The waiter arrived. Coffee appeared. Menus disappeared. And Linda suddenly realized she was terrified. John immediately noticed. Of course he did. You okay? The question was gentle. She laughed nervously. No. One eyebrow lifted. That was all. No panic. No assumptions. Just attention. Bad? No. I don't think so. That's encouraging. She laughed again. Then looked down at her coffee cup. The words refused to cooperate. For one of the few times in her life, Linda Denver was struggling to communicate. John waited. Patiently. As always. Finally she exhaled. I found something out this week. He nodded. Still calm. Still listening. Her heart was hammering. Which felt absurd. This was John. The safest person she'd ever known. But some truths felt enormous when spoken aloud. John. She looked up. His eyes met hers immediately. I'm pregnant. Silence. The world seemed to stop. The diner disappeared. The surrounding conversations faded into white noise. For one terrifying second she waited. She watched him. Searching. looking for shock, concern, fear, anything. The first thing she saw was his grin. That crooked grin. The one she'd fallen in love with. The one he still didn't seem to realize he wore. Relief flooded through her. Then something even stranger happened. John reached into his jacket pocket. Linda frowned. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed something on the table. A small ring box. For several seconds, she simply stared. Her brain refused to keep up. Pregnancy. Ring box. John. Pregnancy. Ring box. None of the pieces were arranging themselves correctly. Then he opened it. The diamond caught tea. He light. Linda's mouth fell open. "What?" John laughed softly. The sound held warmth and affection and a hint of embarrassment. "I should probably explain." "You think?" "Probably." She couldn't even argue. He looked almost amused, as though this wasn't one of the most shocking moments of her life. "I've been carrying this around for 3 months. Her eyes widened. 3 months. John nodded. "More or less. 3 months. You're repeating yourself. John. Fair." She stared at him in disbelief. "You had a ring?" "I had a ring. For 3 months. I wanted the right moment. Apparently you found one." His laugh deepened. "I suppose I did." Then his expression softened. The joking faded. Only sincerity remained. The kind she treasured most. "Linda." Her eyes immediately filled with tears. The way he said her name always mattered. "I spent most of my life happy with the idea that it might just be me." His voice remained steady. "Honest. I wasn't looking for anybody. I know. I liked my life." She smiled through forming tears. "I know that too." His eyes never left hers. Then one night I saw a light left on. A small laugh escaped her. The memory remained vivid for both of them. And everything changed. Linda pressed a hand against her mouth, trying unsuccessfully not to cry. John continued. "You're my best friend." The tears started falling. He smiled, unbothered by them, almost fond of them. "You're the person I want to talk to first when something good happens." The tears accelerated. "You're the person I miss when you're not around." She laughed through them, a ridiculous sound, half joy, half crying. "Now you're the mother of my child." The words hung in the air. Beautiful, terrifying, wonderful. John's smile widened slightly, that familiar crooked grin, the one she'd gladly spend the rest of her life looking at. Then he asked the question. No performance, no audience, no rehearsed speech, just truth, the way everything important between them had always happened. "Will you be my wife?" For a moment she couldn't speak. There were too many emotions trying to occupy the same space. Joy, relief, love, excitement, hope, fear, happiness so large it hurt. She looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, the man who had become her best friend, her partner, the love of her life, the father of her child. Her answer arrived before the words did. A radiant smile spread across her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks. And John got his answer, because he'd always been very good at reading her. Still, she gave him the words anyway. Yes. The single word broke whatever restraint remained. John laughed. Linda laughed. Neither cared that they were both crying a little now. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit. Of course it was. The man maintained entire server infrastructures. Researching a ring size probably felt relaxing. Linda shook her head. "You carried this thing around for 3 months. John nodded. "Seems that way. You ridiculous man. I've been called worse." She looked at the ring, then back at him, then placed a hand over her stomach. Their child, their future, their family. For the first time since seeing the test result, the fear began to fade. Not completely. Life didn't work that way. There would be challenges, sleepless nights, mistakes, unexpected turns. But she wouldn't face any of them alone. Neither would he. 1 year ago, a lonely woman sat in a dark office overlooking a city. 1 year later, she sat in a diner wearing an engagement ring, while the man she loved smiled across the table. The future suddenly seemed much brighter than it had any right to be. And this time, neither of them was in any hurry to leave.